The cold that morning was not the kind that merely touched the skin. It seeped into the bones, into the soul, into the quiet corners of the heart that had forgotten what warmth felt like. Snow blanketed the ground in dull sheets of gray-white, muffling every sound except the distant creak of the barn door and the murmur of men's voices inside. The air smelled of hay and frost, with an undercurrent of something sour, shame, maybe, or desperation. Eliza Miller stood barefoot on a wooden crate in the middle of that barn, her thin dress torn at the hem, her arms wrapped around her body in a futile attempt to trap some heat. Her lips were pale, her face hollow from too many nights spent awake, and her eyes, once soft and bright, were now like two shards of broken glass reflecting every man's stare. Around her, rough-faced farmers leaned on fence rails, their breath turning to mist as they whispered and chuckled. "She's a pretty thing," one of them muttered. "Just a shame she's cursed." Eliza heard it but didn't flinch. She had heard worse these past months. Cursed, broken, barren, words that cut sharper than any knife but left no visible wound. Her father stood beside the crate, hat pulled low, his mouth a hard line. He looked like a man who'd been hollowed out and filled with dust. He had lost his crops, his livestock, and now, in his eyes, he was losing the last thing that could be traded for coin, his daughter. "She's strong," he said to the room, his voice rough with pride that sounded forced. "Good with housework, quiet, obedient." The words made Eliza's stomach twist. He spoke as if describing a mule. She remembered when he used to call her his little songbird, back when her mother was alive and the world seemed softer. That was before the stillbirth. Before the doctor had told her, with a polite, detached sorrow, that she would never bear children again. "She's barren," her father said flatly, spitting the word like something bitter. The doctor confirmed it. "But she can still work." The barn went silent for a heartbeat, the men exchanging looks. One laughed under his breath. Another coughed and stared at the ground. Eliza felt the heat of shame rise up her neck, but she stayed still, her hands trembling only slightly. She would not cry. Not again. A merchant from town stepped forward, heavy gold ring flashing on his thick fingers. $50, you said. Her father nodded, his eyes fixed on the floorboards. "That's right." The merchant smirked. "50 for a woman who can't give a man children. You're dreaming, Miller." There was laughter, short, cruel laughter that echoed in the rafters. Eliza closed her eyes. She imagined she was somewhere else, by the river behind the farm, barefoot in the mud, her mother's voice singing softly through the willows. But the sound of coins clinking and men haggling snapped her back. 30, someone said. 40, 35 and I'll feed her. Her father hesitated. His jaw worked, the muscle twitching. Then he said, 40, and she's yours. It was then that the door opened. The cold rushed in first, scattering bits of straw into the air. A tall man stepped inside, snow clinging to his coat, his hat dripping meltwater. He stood still for a long moment, as though letting his eyes adjust to the dimness. Every head turned toward him. "I'll take her," the man said, his voice low but firm. Silence followed. Even the horses in their stalls stopped shifting. Her father blinked. "Who the hell are you?" The stranger walked forward, boots thudding against the wooden floor. "Name's Caleb Turner." He reached into his coat and pulled out a wad of folded bills, dropping them onto the table without counting. "That should cover your price." Miller frowned. "You know what you're buying." "Turner. She's barren. Can't bear children. You'd be wasting your money." Caleb's eyes flicked toward Eliza. For a moment, she thought she saw pity there, but no, it wasn't pity. It was something quieter, something that felt like recognition. "I heard you," he said. "And I'm not buying a broodmare. I need a woman who can keep a house running, not fill it with noise." A few of the men laughed uneasily, unsure if he was serious. Her father hesitated, then shrugged. "Suit yourself." He took the money, his fingers shaking. He didn't look at her. Eliza didn't move. She stood frozen as the stranger turned toward her. He wasn't a young man, his beard was shot with gray, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. His clothes were plain but well kept, and his hands looked like they'd seen years of work and loss alike. "Come on," he said softly, holding out his coat. Eliza stared at him, uncomprehending. "You mean, now?" "Yes, now." She looked at her father, silently pleading for a glance, a word, a goodbye, but he was already counting the bills, his lips moving soundlessly. She waited a heartbeat longer, then stepped down from the crate. The floor was icy against her bare feet. Caleb draped his coat around her shoulders. It was heavy, smelled faintly of tobacco and pine, and carried a warmth that startled her. For the first time in months, she didn't feel the cold immediately reach her skin. Outside, the snow had thickened into a white curtain. The wagon stood waiting, its horses stamping impatiently. Caleb helped her climb up, his touch steady and sure. As he took the reins, she found her voice, barely louder than the wind. "Why?" she asked. He glanced at her. "Why what? Why would you take me? You don't even know me." His eyes stayed on the snowy road ahead. "Because I know what it's like to lose the thing that makes the world look at you as if you matter." She frowned, not understanding, but he didn't say more. The wagon lurched forward, the sound of hooves muffled by the snow. Behind them, the barn grew smaller, the laughter fading into the distance until there was nothing left but the wind and the creak of wood. Eliza sat quietly, clutching the coat around her, feeling the strange, foreign warmth against her chest. For so long, she had been cold, not just from the winter, but from the emptiness inside her that no fire had been able to reach. Now, as the rancher beside her guided the wagon through the storm, she allowed herself a single, fragile thought. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't being taken away as a burden. Maybe she was being rescued. The snow fell heavier, covering the ruts in the road, erasing the traces of where she had come from. And though she didn't yet know where the road would lead, she clung to the faint, flickering spark that something inside her whispered, "This time, you're going home." The days at Turner Ranch began long before sunrise, when the stars still hung over the frozen plains like distant candles and the cold bit deep enough to make every breath sting. Eliza rose early each morning, wrapping herself in one of Caleb's spare coats, her small frame swallowed by the rough wool. The first weeks had been quiet, almost wordless. Caleb gave her simple tasks, feeding the hens, patching torn linens, boiling water for the coffee that always sat steaming on the wooden table when he came in from the stables. The ranch was vast and lonely, a patch of land surrounded by endless stretches of snow and pine. The fences sagged, the barn door creaked with every gust, and the cabin they lived in was old but solid. There was something comforting in its silence. Nobody came, nobody gossiped, nobody whispered the word Barren. For the first time since she could remember, Eliza felt invisible in a way that didn't hurt. Caleb didn't treat her like a servant. He worked beside her, sometimes in silence, sometimes humming an old hymn that drifted across the fields like smoke. He spoke little of himself, but she learned things by observing: the small scar above his wrist from years of ranch work, the way he paused before entering his house every evening, as if bracing himself for memories that still lingered inside. It was 2 months after he'd brought her to the ranch when she finally dared to ask him about the framed photo on the mantel, a woman with kind eyes holding 2 little boys. She had been dusting when she noticed the way Caleb's gaze softened at the sight. "Your family?" she asked quietly, almost afraid to disturb the moment. He nodded once, his jaw tightening. "Was my wife and sons. Fever took 'em, years back." Eliza said nothing more, but that night, she sat awake by the window, thinking about how loss carved the same hollow space inside every heart, hers from being unloved, his from having loved too much. Maybe that was what drew them together, 2 broken halves circling around something neither had words for. Winter began to loosen its grip in slow, hesitant breaths. The snow melted into soft mud, and the smell of pine and wet earth filled the air. Life returned in small ways, first the song of a bird on the fence post, then the first patch of green breaking through near the well. Eliza noticed how the light seemed to change too, warmer, golden, catching in Caleb's hair when he worked outdoors. One evening, as the sun slipped low and turned the sky to fire, she brought him a tin cup of coffee while he fixed a broken lantern in the barn. The light flickered on his hands as he tightened the screw, the muscles in his arms shifting beneath his rolled-up sleeves. He looked tired, but not the kind of tired that came from work, something deeper. "You work too much," she said softly, leaning against the doorway. He glanced up at her, a hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "So do you. It's all I know." She set the cup down beside him. "Work makes the time pass." He wiped his hands on a rag and sat on a hay bale, studying her in the dim lantern light. "You don't have to earn your right to be here, Eliza. I didn't bring you to work yourself to the bone." She lowered her gaze, fingers fidgeting with the edge of her apron. "I'm not afraid of work. I'm afraid of being useless. That's what they said I was, back home." Useless to a man, useless to a family. He frowned, setting the lantern aside. Who said that? My father. The neighbors. Even the preacher's wife. Said God made a woman to bring life, and I failed him. Caleb stood, the movement slow but deliberate. He took a step toward her, the wooden floor creaking beneath his boots. Then they don't know God half as well as they think they do. Her breath caught. The smell of oil and hay filled the space between them, and she could hear his heartbeat, steady, calm. You think a woman's worth is in what her body can give. He continued, his voice softer now. You cook, you work the land, you keep this place alive. You listen when I talk, and you don't fill the air with nonsense. You've given me peace, Eliza. You think that counts for nothing. Her throat tightened. You don't mean that. I do. She took a step back, shaking her head. You're just being kind. He reached out, his rough hand brushing against her chin, lifting it until she had no choice but to meet his gaze. Kindness is what men give to strangers. I'm not kind, Eliza. I'm honest. The words hung there between them, heavy and real. I buried my wife 5 winters ago, he said quietly. She gave me sons, yes. But when they were gone, when the house went silent, I learned something: children don't fill the emptiness. When love is gone, I don't need children, Eliza. I need you. Her eyes widened, tears glinting in the low light. Me, she whispered. He nodded. You. The word landed like a seed in her chest, small but alive. She wanted to believe it, but disbelief clung to her like a second skin. You don't understand, she said, her voice breaking. I've got nothing left to give. I've been emptied out. He smiled faintly, a sad, gentle smile that reached his eyes. Then let me help fill you again. Not with promises, not with words. Just life. Quiet, steady life. She stood trembling, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. For the first time, she didn't wipe them away. Caleb reached up, his thumb catching one, his touch tender as a whisper. You're not barren, he said softly. You just haven't been given the right soil to grow in. The lantern flickered, casting golden ripples across the barn walls. Eliza felt something deep inside her, a warmth that wasn't from the light, wasn't from the air. It was something older, something buried. Hope. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The horses shifted quietly in their stalls, the wind hummed through the cracks in the wood, and time seemed to slow until there was nothing left but breath and heartbeat. Finally, Caleb stepped back, breaking the spell just enough for her to breathe. Come on, he murmured. Supper'll get cold. She nodded, following him out into the night. The stars were brighter now, the sky washed clean by the melting snow. As they walked side by side, their shoulders brushed, and she didn't pull away. That night, as she lay in the small room he'd given her, she stared at the ceiling and listened to the faint sound of him moving in the room next door. She thought about his words, I don't need children. I need you. No one had ever said they needed her before, not like that. Outside, the frost on the window began to thaw, leaving clear streaks where the light of dawn would soon slip through. And in the quiet of that sleeping ranch, Eliza felt the smallest, strangest smile bloom on her lips. It wasn't love yet. It wasn't a fairy tale. But it was something new, fragile and alive, like the first green shoot pushing through winter's grave. For the first time in years, Eliza didn't dream of escape. She dreamed of roots.